Hi, welcome back to another segment of the Grassy Knoll. You're probably hearing this on June 9th, 2006. And with us, and you're not going to believe this, Andrew, but this is number 8. Are you okay with that?
Way to go.
Well, the other one was like, well, 7 and 6, I don't know, but this is 8. As far as I can find out, it's 8. And we do thank Andrew Colvin for coming back. His website is andycolvin.com. You know that he has been involved with, first of all, making a documentary called The Mothman Photographer. And he's been on a number of times to talk about all the stuff that's going on in and around that particular phenomena. And also, which I kind of find really interesting, all the stuff that goes on in the Ohio Valley, especially around West Virginia. And it's been a while since we spoke, although, you know, Andrew, this is going to go up probably on June 9th. Your last show just aired this last Friday. So people are just getting into hearing the last segment you did. That would be the 19th of May, okay? Now, let me ask you, first of all, Cleveland is dust.
Yes, I was really hoping Cleveland would win, beat the Detroit Pistons, because Cleveland is one of the hubs of the Mothman conspiracy and close to my heart for that reason. And, you know, an interesting thing about that series was that I heard them mention that the Detroit athletic coach uses cucumber a mixture of cucumber and other stuff to deal with the injuries. And
okay.
This reminded me of the cucumber coming up before in our little jaunt back to West Virginia. I noticed that at this place where all these sightings occurred, there was a smell of cucumber in the air, and we couldn't pin it. We figured it's some plant there, but I don't think it's a cucumber plant, but it smells like a cucumber plant, and the cucumber plant is the most powerful aphrodisiac. They did some research about 5 years ago, I think it was, and found that that was the scent that most people were attracted to at a really deep level. And I'm wondering if that smell has something to do with this process of seeing entities. You know, if you've got a field of energy at a certain spot that's storing memory, and this is one of the things that the Mothman scientist Kuharik talked about, was how he actually did some telepathy experiments with psychics holding objects and found that objects do indeed hold memory, and this is why people can solve criminal cases and things by holding the objects of the person in question. I'm thinking that this could also extend to the olfactory senses, you know, these kinds of things, kinds of stimuli that trigger in the brain certain responses.
Well, two things. One, with regard to cucumber, apparently it's got a lot more going for it than people realize it does. Additionally, it seems to be an excellent food. I mean, it's always involved in juicing, and when people apply it to their bodies, it's not, without good reason. But also, you were saying something about the smell of cucumber.
Yeah.
In and around what?
Well, it was a test for what was the most potent, really, what was in a lab, what is the smell that really does stimulate attraction? It was a fragrance test.
Sure.
For, perfumes.
Mm-hmm.
And trying to decipher what really does work, and cucumber was the one that I remembered from the... Mm-hmm. I don't have the data in front of me, but I remember that. But there's a health angle to this, especially in terms of the Native Americans who feel that Thunderbird witnesses make good healers. And, of course, if there is a connection with the smell, maybe the cucumber, maybe healing substances have to do with this process too. And one of one of the witnesses I interviewed, a Bigfoot contactee named Kuoni. A lot of people have heard of him. He's popularizing the interdimensional aspect of Bigfoot. He is a master herbalist and talked about how in certain spots in the forest you'll have the poison and the antidote growing close
right next to each other, right? Mm-hmm.
And this sort of relates to one of Puharich's theories about. He did this diagram that I think I may have mentioned last time. Did I mention these 4 circles? When you watch how plasma manifests, it swirls and it creates a little vortex.
Okay.
A lot of people have seen these little black wispy vortexes, smoky things in there. Like one of my witnesses in the documentary saw it in her office the same week that we had some MIB activity occurring with her when her name got out that she was involved in the project. Some strange things started happening. She saw this whirling black thing. And one person even saw, and this isn't a person that I talked to personally, but a report that I read that someone saw it coalesce into a figure. So these plasma vortexes appear to be able to swirl and create matter. And if you don't draw a diagram of it, it's lost. It's these 4. It's basically a swirl in one way, and then an opposite swirl, which has a negative charge, positive, negative charge. And then there's an anti-dimension. There's where it's causing an opposite spin in the other dimension. And so the way you draw this is the 4 circles, and it looks very much like Ezekiel's wheel, drawing from 1,000 years ago, Ezekiel's wheel, which I think somehow has some connection to this. Anyway.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, anyway, yeah, there's more to it, but I just was reminded of that and didn't know did I introduce that last time, that idea?
Yeah, you did. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I mean, I tell you what, I mean, obviously it's my fault too. I'll call it my fault. We talk about a lot of things, and we lay out somewhat of a framework, but I have to tell you, and as you very well know, I mean, where some of this stuff leads, I mean, yeah, I'll go down a side street and I might get back again for the rest of the show, but, I'll deal with that. I mean, nobody seems to be upset about it. In fact, Andrew, we got some questions that people wanted to ask of you when next you came on. Are you all right with that right now?
Sure.
All right, let's do that. I'm going to take
By the way, the Greek letter psi, for psi, PSI, is the 23rd letter, and its emblem is very It's very similar to the outstretched arms of the Garuda. It's much like the Christ symbol, and there's a bunch of stuff that relates to that I found very synchronistic.
All right.
This last week that I want to talk about later.
Well, I'll tell you what. Why don't you pop it out now? I mean, you tabled it. That's fine. What about the 23rd letter and the synchronicity you find there?
Well, there's a Greek, the Greeks also tapped into this phenomenon and had their whole pantheon laid out to describe it. And Apollo is one that's very similar to Christ, actually, and he came right before Christ. There's a contemporary of, and some speculate that he was, a real figure, Apollonius, and maybe Christ wasn't, and there's these kinds of debates that go on, but this was a real figure. And of course, and the whole symbology, and I can't remember it all right now, but the symbologies of Apollo are very similar to the Garuda. And so their 23rd letter, which 23 is a big number in the Masonic world, that 23rd letter is PSI, looks very much like the Garuda with the outstretched arms. And then the next letter is Omega. If you put the two together, you have the Garuda holding the two-headed snake, which you see everywhere. So there's something very important about those letters and the symbology behind them. Mm-hmm. And of course, psi is, maybe the ether is called psi by so many scientists today because it has a connection to that symbology. There's something about that Garuda. And it's just another way of saying, I've already established that the Buddhists and Hindus call consider the Garuda the god of spaces and gaps, but it's also true of the Greeks.
Mm-hmm.
And it, like so many things, these references come up in modern day explorations. With Keel, with myself, with Keel it was Apol. He kept running across this scary. Well, I don't know if he was this. It's hard to tell based on the movie and how things have been sort of twisted over the years. But he had this contactee or this entity called Apol, which is short for Apollo in my mind, communicating with him.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if this was Keel's way of introducing this very probably controversial. I think a lot of this stuff was way more controversial then, and I'm still not sure how much of it he put in there to sort of avoid attacking it directly,
mm-hmm.
or if he really had some voice coming over the phone naming itself Apol. But it's suggestive, just in the way that Indrid Cold, the name of Indrid Cold, being derived from the Hindu, is very suggestive that there's some connection to these ancient ways of viewing the phenomenon.
All right. We've got at least two questions, both of which are probably a little extant as far as what they're going to need and far as response goes. So can I throw one at you?
Sure.
Okay. It says, now does he, meaning you, believe then that time is plastic in certain ways? And I'm only going to say that we had Alan Watt on recently who spoke expressly to culture and not necessarily time, Andrew, but just, our culture and everything that goes around us. So anyway, that's inside something else. It's another issue. But again, it said, do you believe then that time is plastic in certain ways? For example, if there is a great deal of trauma in a location, does it have a way of reaching back in time as well as forward in time? And I have another a little paragraph here to mention, which is not so much a question but a comment or impartation of the news. So what about time? Can you speak to that?
Well, I think it's absolutely true because that's well, I mean, maybe it's not provable, but it's. I guess the physicists certainly think it is. But it's a good explanation for why someone could see, like we were able to see this vision of 911 34 years before it happened. And we talk about this in the documentary. I talked to a shaman here in Seattle who felt like I had perhaps traveled or been connected to some energy that had traveled and caused this photo to exhibit what looks like a picture of the Garuda in the window. He thought that I had somehow not physically done anything, but just he believes that people can affect photos that way. And this is, bizarrely enough, another one of Puhart's experiments, that he proved that psychics could affect film emulsion. So this shaman felt like that you could almost view it as dropping a stone in the water. And then if you have the traumatic event, the rock dropping in the water, you have the ripples that go out in all directions, and it's doing that in time as well. Although time is an abstraction for us, so time is like almost an indeterminate, what they call in Buddhism an indeterminate, something that's probably not answerable because it's too reflexive or for some other reason, and not worth too much pondering, but. Time's got some of that going on, but it's not something I dwell on too much. But, I think it is that seemed to be happening in our trip because of this unusual thing that happened in 2002, where we were at our vortex area, and you can hear this in the field recording. We're talking about what we're seeing, and I was the person in the lead, and I got there first and probably soaked up most of it. Actually, the other people had on protective devices, like stones and things to absorb the energy, but I just took it, and and had a vision that night of a drowning in the water at this spot in the river. And we went, and 3 days later we had a drowning there, and I happened to come upon it, and I thought to myself, well, that's a precognition I had. But then I found out that there had been really a collapse of a bridge there 100 years before that had killed some children, and there were some legends about it and so forth. So I'm not sure if the vision I saw was one from the past or one from the future. And it got me thinking along those lines, and it sort of becomes difficult to tell if you're seeing a ripple from in front of you in time or from in back of you. If you're feeling it coming through the cytoplasma, this is sort of how it works. People pick up these things from the ether. But there are definitely physical rules to it that can be studied, and Puharich was doing that. And I wanted to clear up one thing I said last time, that I said that I wasn't sure about whether or not he had decided on distance and how distance relates to ESP, but he definitely comes down on the side of distance does matter. The further away you get from something that you're trying to signal to or receive from, it does get weaker. The signal gets weaker. And I relate this somehow in my mind to the idea of well, it kind of left me here. Go back to your question again, and I'll pick up where I left off.
Oh, no, it was well, I mean, it comes down to the idea of time and whether it's malleable. I mean, I'm not deep in this whatsoever, but there's a lot of people who consider within the realm of quantum physics, you can jump ahead in time, go back in time. I mean, it makes all the science fiction stuff look plausible. So with regard to the plasticity of time, I think that's what the questioner was saying. In fact, let me just restate it and said, is there a great deal of trauma? If there is a great deal of trauma in a location, does it have a way of reaching back in time as well as forward? So that's where we first started off. And your response?
Well, I said I thought it did, and the thing I was forgetting there was the collective unconscious. It reminds me of the collective unconscious. People wonder about human will versus fate versus destiny, because once you get into time, you start getting into these issues of, if you know what's going to happen, then is it destiny, or is there really destiny, or can we change it? Because this does come up in this phenomenon, is that you're given messages about the future, and I'm struggling with this right now.
Okay.
I was given a couple of other things that I know are coming, and I know something's coming, but I don't know exactly what it is, and how do I interpret that? How do I deal with that? Do I have an effect on that? Can I affect that? Or is destiny locked in? And I think this thing about distance with ESP kind of explains it. You do have influence on it, but the further away you get from a particular thing, a particular little vortex going on, your ability to manipulate it goes down. So when you look at the collective unconscious and how we are all just a part of it, a wave on an ocean of consciousness, you can affect things, but you're limited in how much you can affect it. And so if you're given a precognition, and I do feel like this is part of the process, and Keel talks about it too, is that oftentimes the researcher is challenged to do something, is given a mission of some kind. And I can definitely say that that's true in my case. I've been following this stuff for so long. The last 5 years I've been doing this particular project, but I've been studying this kind of thing for ever since, for decades. So,
so as a researcher, you kind of asked to, as it is in many cases when you're caught between two entities or whatever, to stand back and do nothing to affect the outcome. Is that the situation you find yourself in? I mean, we've looked at this as the province of science fiction for a long, long time. But would it be true that if you go back and you delve into things, Andrew, that you're presented with a situation where you might be able to alter the outcome?
Most people, and I'm trying to remember who said this, but I recently was reading on this, and I liked this idea at the time, which was that you sometimes if you go, and it was Eugenia Macer's story. She writes a lot about this kind of internal dialogue that you shouldn't try to do that too much. Maybe you don't want to really change it, because what you change it to might be worse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you have no way of knowing.
But an interesting, I just wanted to throw this other name out, because I just, every day I'm reading new things and adding new things, so I'm sort of changing all the time. But this person is involved with the Mothman indirectly. Her name's Anna Genslinger. She was one of Gray Barker's authors. She wrote about the Philadelphia experiment, sort of a side issue, a side note of the Philadelphia experiment is this Carlos Allende guy who, he was really central to the whole story, but he contacted a researcher named Morris K. Jessup, who was a UFO researcher, and Jessup was mysteriously died, and the story kind of went away. And then Genslinger one day is reading about it, she's watching the Philadelphia experiment movie or something. She's reading Charles Berlitz, who wrote the Philadelphia experiment. She was reading one of his books. Suddenly had a flash, and she was reading about Jessup. Had a flash that Jessup had been murdered, and ends up writing a book. This is a woman who just out of the blue, suddenly she starts to feel like Jessup is speaking to her from the other side, and does some really original research into what happened to him, and it sort of ignited that part of the Philadelphia experiment again. And this was back in the 80s that she sort of recharged it again. It originally started back in the 40s. But there you go. I mean, and not only can you get a message from an entity like a semi-deity, but you can get it from a specific person, like someone who's been murdered. And this will lead and she talks about, and this is going to have a transcript of this, but she did an interview once where she talked about how she felt like he was speaking to her from the other side. And she knew details about him that she could never have known, because she was getting them, from him somehow. And it's pretty gripping. Well, maybe not gripping's not the word, but it's pretty interesting stuff.
Who was the he that she was getting messages from?
Morris K. Jessup.
Okay. All right.
His book, Case for the UFO, second book was expanding the case for the UFO.
Okay.
He was a great astronomer who did a lot of great research, and he's part of the Philadelphia experiment pantheon, if you will.
Okay. Now, before we go on to Philadelphia experiment, also part of the question that we got from a listener, actually this is a comment, if you will. It says, the Fort Thomas military post in northern Kentucky, let me get this up in front of me, I'm told has an engineering reserve unit there and a PSYOPs unit. My dad told me that Jack Ruby used to live in Bellevue, Kentucky, and ran a nightclub. What do you know about that?
Well, it reminds me of the story I told last time. I think I told it last time about the girls in the basement who saw an entity, and their crosses and things were melted off from around their neck.
Right.
This occurred right on the border of Fort Thomas and Fort Mitchell, I believe. I'm pretty sure that they're side by side. But that's where it was. It's on this big knoll, this big hill that's south of Cincinnati. So you go up there and there's these what used to be forts, because it was a prime spot. But also, these prime spots were prime spots for the Indians and whoever lived there, before the Indians. So
it's a controlling spot for the river, right?
Yes.
Okay.
The same thing can be seen in my neighborhood in West Virginia. Big curve in the river, big hill behind the curve, flat plain there because of the curve of the river. It creates the flat plain where you can build things, and then that's why it was so strategic that they built. It was fought over, and the North and the South fought over it, and then it's been a military outpost for a couple hundred years probably.
What do you know about Ruby being in and around those environs?
I don't, but it rings a bell, and it certainly makes sense given the history of the Ohio Valley. Going back to the Indian days, it was extremely dangerous. It was, people were lying in wait along the banks. It was one of the most dangerous places to try to travel through to the west. So everybody basically ended up going up north through western New York and over to Cleveland. And that's kind of why Cleveland became, so important, is that it was the easiest town to get to west of the mountains.
Did you come across information that supported the fact that, like, let's not go through the Ohio Valley because it's too weird, let's go on a northern route?
That's implied in Otis K. Rice's book.
Okay.
That those routes were, there were 4 major routes, and certain ones were scarier than others. And the one through the Kanawha Valley, where I lived, was the worst, the most wild. And so, basically, from where that meets the Ohio on down, the Ohio was also very scary. I just think it influenced the gambling, the whole gambling thing. It was like a frontier, it was a frontier mentality, yet rich with natural resources. So unlike Las Vegas, which is very difficult, sort of, to build in, this area, or that valley was very easy to build up and get the gambling going. It was just anyway. So the big influence. There's a big mob influence there. Our town was ran by I would have to say Eastern Orthodox folks, and
Eastern Orthodox.
Yeah, and yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there's that. There's a lot of there's some racetracks and things there, and if you look into the ownership of those and sort of who runs things.
And the Kanawha River, does that run north from West Virginia into the Ohio?
Say that again?
All right, I'm assuming, I'm thinking back, there is a Kanawha River, is there not?
Correct.
All right, does that run into the Ohio?
Yes, and so it's about 35 miles from where it meets the Ohio to where I lived, or 30 miles, and then about 35 miles that you can no longer navigate up it very easily. So they had to dam it.
Why is that? Is it through mountainous terrain, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there were gorges and things.
Okay.
Falls.
By the way, that rings a bell to a certain extent. Do people use that river to this day somewhat as a rafting venue?
Well, that's another river. That's one of the ones that runs into it.
Mm-hmm.
I think the New River runs into Kanawha. Yeah. And,
okay.
So there you go. I mean, that's you have world-class whitewater rafting in that river, but further up where it's not dammed. Yeah. So it would have been very treacherous, I guess.
Well, I seem to remember that because when I was in graduate school at Ohio U, somebody did a story on doing something on the Kanawha River, and I wasn't really paying much of attention. I'm assuming it was rafting or doing some, kayaking. Obviously not flat water, but white water. And that does ring a bell now. But before we go any further, we're up on the half hour. This is the Grassy Knoll. This is Biz. We're speaking with Andrew Colvin. Most of you probably are very familiar with the fact that we're doing a bunch of shows, which is going to constitute a series. But Andrew, on your website, that would be andycolvin.com. Are there things that you would direct people to with regard to either doing further research or purchasing the documentary?
Well, if you go to the site there, you'll see the link to buying the documentary. You can also check eBay because we have specials on there.
Okay.
Just do a Mothman search on eBay. We've got the transcription for the Mothman book finished, and all the interviews, lots of extras, extra talks, things from Keel and other researchers that are difficult to find. I was just looking at some of the transcription and was amazed to see how much of it I'd forgotten, because oftentimes it takes me 2 or 3 times of reading something where it starts to sink in. And if you're just seeing it on a video, it doesn't really, it sinks in even less probably. So it'll be good to see those. But I was working on the next subject, Philadelphia experiment, doing some transcription with that, checking things. But I'm a little scattered, just because of this is the beginning of my vacation, and I've had not had much time to really focus on this stuff. But I'm hoping here in the next few days we can do another session or
sure.
two.
Yeah, not a problem. Also, when you in your Mothman Photographer's documentary, how many hours long is it?
It's 30, and we've got an extra 10 hours of rare recordings with figures in the background of this. And I think a lot of this stuff it goes along with the norm, which is that the more groundbreaking in a way some of this stuff is, the harder it is to find. And we sort of had a little renaissance in the 70s and 80s with a lot of books coming out on this kind of thing, and then since then it's kind of been dry. You've had a lot more stuff on TV, about UFOs and things that aren't really that deep, but you don't really find. Some of the stuff is just so far back that you really have to dig for it, and I think a lot of it's just never been made available. You've got some of the early books on the Mothman cost $300, and they're not in the libraries.
By the way, when was the last time you were back in West Virginia?
That was 2003.
Okay.
Oh, 2004, sorry.
Okay. How long did you spend there?
How long did I spend there? You mean years? How long did I live there?
Oh, no. How long on your visit were you around?
Oh, we were there for a wedding. We weren't there for very long.
Okay.
I'm hoping to get back there and check out the Wayne Forest area to see if a plane crashed there on the day of 9/11.
Ooh.
That's our next step, because that's the big missing area in the whole. Everyone seems to have gotten Flight 93 figured out pretty well. Well, I mean, the conspiracy researchers seem to have it right, and that is, as usual, matched by the rhetoric or propaganda coming out from the other side.
Right.
In this sense, the new movie that's, I imagine, is completely filled with
garbage,
misinformation.
Yeah. I don't think that 93's been figured out, but I tell you what, I was thinking, maybe a day or so ago, with you coming on and what you told me about what you thought, or what has been reported to have made a turn above that, again, Ohio Valley area. And I'll be honest with you, with 93 and 77, those are both planes that nobody knows what happened to. We're not going to get into the whole thing about, we went to the Pentagon. Yeah, okay, fine. But the behavior of those planes in the area that they were in made me think back to what you and I spoke about. So that's kind of interesting. And, of course, without a doubt, if we can take that on at another time, great.
Well, one interesting thing I found, if I could just mention it.
Absolutely. Sure. Shoot.
When we were there filming, we didn't know about this, but there were red-eyed creature sightings in Wayne National Forest in 2002. So this is not long after 9/11. And, 911 is that stone dropping in the water. So you're going to have big signals there of geographical connections or whatever kind of connections you can think of. And then the ripples go out.
Mm-hmm.
And you can almost look at the distance of time between events and sort of figure out when, the next wave is coming through. And Keel was very good at predicting those kind of waves. They would tend to come every 5 years.
Well, what does that really mean? And has Keel said anything post 9/11? I mean, you predict when waves can occur, but I mean, what is it about the passing of time that would make a certain 5 or 10 years more? I guess will avail itself to dictate events. If I mean, I'm a little lost here. But go ahead and tell me what you think about the passing of time and like, as you said, the stones dropping in the water.
Well, some of these things are just they're things that occurred they're suggestive, and that's the first thing, is that the fact that you had creature sightings in the forest there close to 911.
Okay.
It's just another little thing in a way,
Mm-hmm.
I don't mean to blow it into to something else. And with regard to time, well, that's kind of the same question. I mean, I guess I'm just introducing the idea.
Okay.
At this time.
Mm-hmm.
That I really don't know what to think, and where do you start your clock at? If it's every 5 years, where does it begin? You start. But Keel, all I'm saying is that I have a letter in my possession from that Swedish group. It was the only thing in that file that was really worth looking at. But it was a letter from Keel to one of the Swedes, I think, where he predicted in 1973. He predicted that there would be a big wave in 78, and sure enough, that's in in West Virginia, and that's when it happened. So I don't know how he's even given lectures where he gave I think we're going to have some of that in the book, even a transcript as part of that, where he talks about his whole method of doing that. And to be honest, I'm not sure he really explains it.
Okay. And listen, that's okay. We're going to
explain it that well.
Well, we're going to leave it for another time. Like I said, I mean, this is something we're just posing, and that was from all this. What we're doing is extrapolations of a question that was asked by a listener. And I tell you, the whole idea about 9/11, we'll revisit that if you don't mind on another show, and we can dedicate more time to it by all means. However, in the time we got left, and that's really not a lot, but somebody said, and I quote, "Would you try to get Andy to talk more about the Philadelphia experiment?" And when he says his dad was, quote, there, does that mean on that day? Or does it mean that he was there, on the naval yards or what? Do you want to talk to that at all, Andrew?
He was, and well, to preface this, I'll say this is another one of those things that came up very recently. I knew he had been in Norfolk in the war. That's all I sort of grown up knowing.
Okay.
And literally last year, I think it was, probably in 2005, I don't remember the exact date, but I was leafing through this old Navy yearbook he has, and there it is. It's at that same time. And I'm just saying to people, this is another one of those things. Like so many other things, I can point to personally and say, I had no idea of it. But the more I look into it, the more things like that I find. And when you combine this one with the fact that I knew a couple of other people who had seen these men catch on fire and disappear, that seems to relate to the Philadelphia experiment, I was able to at least guess that they brought some of these guys over to West Virginia. But I don't know, like I say, he would not talk about it at all. So I can't say if he was there on that day. But here's the thing about the Philadelphia experiment: it wasn't just one thing, one day. It was at least two things that we know of. There was the first experiment, which started in Philadelphia. The ship disappeared, was seen in Norfolk, and reappeared again in Philadelphia. And then they did it again. After Einstein came back and looked over the data, this is the story, that they tried it again from Norfolk, not Philadelphia. So they actually had a convoy of 130 ships who witnessed, or at least that's how many were in the convoy. How many people and how many ships saw it, we don't know. But Charles Berlitz, implies that there are many people out there who saw it and who have contacted him or knew some part of the story. And he felt like the story was not kept alive by the media, like so many of these stories are, like Roswell, but they were kept alive by working class people that were there, really knew something odd had happened. And so it was a grassroots kind of thing.
Well, what did happen there? Did something disappear?
Yeah, on the second time, they had a ship there in Norfolk that disappeared and came back.
And came back?
Yes. And this is where Allende comes in, because he was on one of the ships in the convoy.
What is he doing there?
Well, he was a merchant marine.
Allende?
Carlos Allende.
Really?
Are you familiar with him?
Are we talking about the dictator?
No.
Oh, probably not, okay.
No, Carlos Allende, just another guy. The mysterious Allende. He was on the SS Furusef. And saw the ship appear and disappear, and talked to Gray Barker about it. And that's kind of where it links back. It links back in other, it links back with some of these men who were there. To Mothman, it links back via some of the men who ended up being in Charleston, probably Point Pleasant during the Mothman times, but it also links back through the Gray Barker's involvement with it. The West Virginia UFO researcher being, somehow, for some reason, being really interested in the Philadelphia experiment. All I can say is that my father was stationed there, and it seems reasonable to assume that some of the guys there went out on these ships, and that a lot of these men, heard the story. If they didn't actually see it themselves, would have heard it, heard about it.
All right. Also, what about this bit about the Montauk chair?
Well, again, I haven't done a ton of research on the Montauk part of it. Again, because I just wonder so much about the guys that are writing about it. Things seem really far out.
Well, how does Montauk?
I can say that Puharich is the guy. If you're going to point to any scientist who worked on a Montauk chair-like project, it's Puharich. So this guy just comes up again and again and again. He was the pioneer of putting people in Faraday cages, electrifying the cages, and these are psychics, testing their abilities with various frequencies and things. And God knows what all he was doing, because one of the things he just kind of throws out offhandedly in one of his books is that they had discovered, I don't know if he had discovered it, but someone he knew had discovered the exact frequency that caused cancer.
And thereby what could happen? If you could identify that, you could eradicate it. Is that true?
Boy, I don't know about that. I think you could certainly cause cancer with it.
Oh, okay, I'm just thinking about, right technology and stuff, which people poo-poo about. But I'm thinking probably if it's a frequency that was generated, there's probably a frequency that can negate it. But that's the province of our show. But anyway, go on with what you're talking about with
Well, let's see. Well, I mean, and that's about as far as I've gotten with it. I've heard about this chair. I read a couple of articles on Montauk.
Mm-hmm.
Alexandra Bruce, I've read some of her stuff. So I don't know.
All right, what is the connection then between the Philadelphia experiment and Montauk?
Oh, okay. Well, to simplify it, it's considered to be a continuation of the same experiments in another location.
Okay. With the goal being?
There's some weird connection to Mark Hamill of Star Wars in it. Yeah, with the Montauk thing. That was one thing that I just sort of was titillated by, I guess.
All right, how'd you come up with Mark Hamill?
Where did I hear that? I probably shouldn't throw things like that out without
you better think about that.
preparing myself to really go into them.
All right, that's okay, but going back to
somebody, I can't remember the exact details.
But going back to the Philadelphia experiment and its relation to Montauk, can you give us some kind of continuum about the two?
Continuum?
I mean, how they connect. Is one advance of the other? Or are they both simultaneously looking for things without the same goal? I mean, what are their purposes, as far as you know?
Well, the Philadelphia experiment was, I guess, Berlitz kind of believes it was an accident of sorts.
A scientific accident, right?
Well, they were testing for one thing and they sort of caught another.
They found something else. Okay.
And then I guess I don't know what you say about the second experiment, but he considers it to be it was successful on the terms of an experimental. In terms of it experimentally, it was successful, but it was very unsuccessful in how it damaged the men involved. So it was a problem. And I'm not sure, at least I'm not convinced that there's a connection between it and Montauk at all. I'm just saying that there are a lot of people out there that say there is, and I'm probably not the best person to explain what the connection is, other than the same kinds of experiments were tried in this other location. And maybe there's a couple of guys who do some time travel within the Montauk story, and I'm trying to remember if they actually came out of the Philadelphia. Maybe it could be that they claim that they went back to the Philadelphia experiment. I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it's so heavy with these difficult to follow trains of thought with regard to time that it's just not something I'm prepared to deal with all these other projects. Just trying to sort of what I'm doing right now is just trying to take what I've gotten personally, the kinds of personal experiences, the interviews with people that I know in my own life and I can vouch for, and taking that stuff and just trying to present that and add that to what's out there already. And
all right, well, let's ask this. I mean, as far as you know, what does the Montauk chair mean? What is that about?
Well, it sounds to me very similar to the Puharic's experiment with placing a telepathic individual in the center of this cage, electrifying the cage, and I think in terms of Montauk, there are these claims that they did this, but they did more to the person. They gave the person drugs, or they hooked them up to other machinery. did mind control, gave them, as Puharich's research progressed, he started influencing the remote viewing movement quite heavily. He knew the Puthoff and Targ and those guys, and those guys started doing time travel with remote viewing.
Well, what point was this? Did this happen that he begat, or at least accelerated, the whole idea about remote viewing? What year were you looking at, if I could ask?
Well, it would have been right after the Uri Geller experiments that they did at Stanford, and that would have been 71, I think. 71.
Okay.
Early 70s. So it would have been soon after that. And they did a lot of that stuff in the Bay Area.
Well, you know,
like I say, they could. There's ways to do time travel just with your mind, and that was one of the things that they used these world-class remote viewers for. And there are even remote viewers who have come out and said, "Oh, I contacted aliens when I was out there, or I went back in time, or I went forward in time." And I don't know how valid. I mean, I'm going to assume that it's possible. Now, again, how much influence you could have is the question. If you did that, if you went back, how much influence could you have? I don't think you could have much, because there is a relationship to your proximity to it, in terms of how much you can do to it.
Well,
and a lot of this stuff, you know, I'm not sure that some of it is controllable, but there are factors that make it partly non-controllable. So, as far as how much they can apply, how much of this can be applied to, you know, normal warfare or whatever, or corporate warfare, or whatever it is they use it for, I'm not sure.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll tell you what. I mean, we've touched on a lot of bases, but also, you also had a line of thought that you at least wanted to broach before the show was over, and I guess it would also be a lead-in to other interviews that we may do. What was on your mind specifically about the work you're doing right now? Is there anything you want to avail us of?
Well, I could. I mean, I'm just looking down at my notes, and I could just grab the first thing I'm seeing. Or
That's pretty much what I asked, though. I mean, that's cool. I mean, when you said you had some stuff scribbled out, I'm saying, okay, we had some questions coming in, and after that, let's take a look at what you might want to, basically broker for other times.
Well, one thing was that Marcella Bennett is one of the transcription things I noticed was one of the witnesses that we see often in the documentaries. Marcella Bennett, I interviewed her and her sister, and I noticed that her sister didn't see the Mothman, but her sister saw balls of fire when they were kids.
All right, hold on a second there, Andrew. People say, like, well, transcription, what's going on? So why don't you explain that a little bit before we go any further?
Right. Well, these are two of the witnesses from the documentary that we've had transcribed, the interviews transcribed.
And why are you doing that?
Over these and proofreading them, I'm seeing little things I forgot.
All right. Why are you transcribing the interviews? For what? A book, right?
Right.
Okay. Okay.
And that her sister, Madeline, uses... she uses birds, and this is kind of a similar idea to what I was saying on Wing TV, was that you can use it. There are certain ways you can try to use this phenomenon. I mean, there's certain areas you want to stay away from because it's too risky. Opening yourself, like astral projection and stuff. I mean, I'm not sure how healthy that is for people who don't have like a strong. If you had a monastic tradition behind you, if you were, had a lot of support for that kind of thing, and a clear field of benevolence, or good karma built up, you could do it. But I don't. There's some things I don't suggest people do. But
agreed.
Looking at a Mothman witness and her family, you can see that one of them uses birds to get what she wants. She has a special relationship to birds in that she uses birds to it's like a genie. She gets asked for wishes or gives the birds her wishes and claims that they come true.
Okay.
And there's a lot of things like that in this whole selection of witnesses. Lots of people saying that they do these things.
All right, and tell me, the guy
who claims he levitates.
Who? Which one would that be?
Well, he doesn't levitate now, but he claims that he did when he was young.
Okay.
And this isn't, something that you hear. Keel claims to have seen it happen.
Are you looking for a name for him?
A what?
Are you looking for a name for him?
For a name? For who?
The levitator.
Oh, no.
No.
His name's Tony White.
Okay.
His whole family is interesting. They've all got unusual phenomenon, and they're one of the featured families, if you could say, in the book. How much time do we have?
None.
Okay.
Where'd you go? Yeah, we only have a couple of minutes left. How did you want to wrap this up?
We could talk about, I don't know, next time we could probably try, we could either do current events, things that are happening out there, like data mining.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any more questions?
No, in fact, I'm going to gash it pretty soon. But look, before we do that, before we go to the next segment, also, by the way, the outro music will be. Is this a group you're in? A musical group?
Yes. Well, we're kind of we're taking a long break.
All right. What do we call you?
Well, it's Ivy League.
Ivy League, I love it, and that's I.V. right?
It turns out there's now a hip hop group that has the same name, and you can buy their T-shirts on the web. So
that's not you, though.
I thought of buying a bunch of their T-shirts and selling them or giving them away as our T-shirts or something. No, but just kidding.
Okay. Well, listen. Let's bring it to a close, and we'll be back again. And I'm telling you, this is segment 8, whether you like it or not. This is Viz. You've been listening to Grassy Knoll. With us has been Andrew Colvin. The website is andycolvin.com. And, there's nothing else we can say in a very short period of time that will embrace all that's going on.
Play more of the song. What song is it?
I don't know. The one I like best about West Virginia.
Okay.
All right.
Oh, the Goodbye, Sweet Home?
I'm thinking, yeah, I like that one a lot.
Got the drum beat?
I'll tell you what.
The Kodo drum beat?
I don't know. You asked me. I like this song. It's playing right now. And if you want people to hear it, I'm gonna cut you off. All right.
All righty. Thank you.
All right. See you later. Bye-bye.
The house was a home of my father. His brother, they lived there too. Now they lie asleep beneath the willow, along with their wives and their children so dear. Leave them alone, please do not disturb them. Don't build an interstate over their graves. Although the law may say you have a right did you pay? Rejoicing, they sold